Well, with me in the studio is the Azerbaijan ambassador to London, Rafael Ibrahimov, and writer on politics in Azerbaijan and the region, Dr. Michael Taylor. Welcome, Ambassador. Can I first turn to you and ask you the first question? I came away from Azerbaijan with, I'd say, mixed feelings. Perhaps I came away with a strong impression that there are many people who may not benefit at all from this imminent oil boom. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I don't think that there will be many people who won't benefit from the oil boom. And I am certain that the whole country will benefit from that. The most important question now is to take measures in order to avoid what you mentioned as what you referred to as the oil curse or paradox of plenty. That is the most important factor in the situation now.
But still, there is, as the representative from the UN mentioned, the biggest problem still is poverty. And that poverty comes from something. There have been a lot of political problems related to the country over the past few decades. We know that. But a lot of it must be to do with the corruption that exists. What measures are they taking to put a stop to this seemingly massive corruption problem that they have? Well,
the corruption problem does exist, but going back to the poverty, I'd like to mention here that we are talking about 1 million of refugees and IDPs who were expelled from their homes from the occupied territories of Azerbaijan, occupied by the neighboring Armenia. So you have already one segment of the population of the country which are suffering from being ousted from their homes. Corruption does exist, and we are tackling the problem. Certainly, there is a program in place which runs from year 2004 to 2006. The anti-corruption law has been taken already, and it has been adopted. Now, there are different measures which are being taken by the government of Azerbaijan in all spheres, that is, in the executive sphere, in legislative sphere, in the economic life of the country, in streamlining the legal environment of the country in order to use all the possible mechanisms to curb the corruption in the country.
But as you heard, the Transparency International lady who we spoke to, she was talking about corruption in schools. I mean, how do you deal with a problem so deeply ingrained? I mean, if it's in schools, how do you deal with that?
Well, we have to consider the roots of the corruption, and one of the most important roots is the insufficient salaries of the teachers. You are talking about the schools, so let's face the schools. And therefore the salaries are being raised, and Azerbaijan is becoming more and more prosperous because of the oil, and therefore we are aware of the problem and we are tackling it.
Okay, if I can just turn to Mr. Taylor, I want to ask him more specifically about the oil curse that we touched on already. How justified is that term in the case of Azerbaijan?
It can be a very tricky problem for an economy to deal with, the fact that you've got so much money coming in for one sector. For a start, what tends to happen with a big inflow of dollars, so-called petro economy, is that it tends to push up the exchange rate, which makes it very difficult for the rest of the economy to export to other countries. So there's a depressing effect on the rest of the economy, on the non-oil sector, on manufacturing. But to some extent in Azerbaijan they've made things more difficult for themselves than they perhaps could have done, because they have been very slow to restructure their non-oil economy, and there's a lot of underemployment. There should really be a shakeout of excess labour in several parts of the economy.
That's presumably the government's fault, though?
It is, yes.
So what you say the government is taking steps to that. How much is that the problem that Dr. Taylor refers to do with, for example, the deal signed, the contract, the famous contract of the century? Do you think that was a fair deal for Azerbaijan, or what do you think? I mean, when I spoke to the BP head of BP in Baku, he told me that obviously Azerbaijan was in a difficult situation at the time, so they had to. They needed to sign the deal. I mean, do you think in retrospect you could have got a better deal?
Well, there is always a possibility of getting a better deal in retrospect, but I think that the deal that Azerbaijan signed with BP, and with the consortium of the foreign companies, is very fair. And the oil resources of the country are being developed. I agree with Dr. Taylor that definitely, the oil windfalls that flow into the economy, they lead to the appreciation of the local currency, and that certainly is very detrimental to the local producers, to the exporters, etc. Yes, that's the case. But we have established the oil fund, one of the most potent mechanisms in that respect, in order to sterilize the economy. And this very oil fund is the governmental body that provides considerable resources to house the refugees, to address their needs in education, in healthcare and others.
Dr. Taylor, can I just ask you, there are obviously problems as well, though, with corruption inside that oil industry.
I should think so. It's oil seems to be rather sticky. I mean, it passes through people's hands, and the money sticks to their hands. It's a problem in many developing countries where you have a sort of natural resource. I don't know exactly why that is, but experience shows that it's very tricky to stop it going wrong, becoming a curse for the country as much as a benefit.
Could it be, perhaps, do you think, the fact that the Aliyev family is in effect running the country in a kind of relatively parochial style? Some people say.
I rather agree with that. I think the trouble with Azerbaijan is that you have a sort of a crony system of government, if I can say that, a clan system of government, where you have friends and relatives that are employed in the government and also in industry. And it's not a meritocratic way of running the country at all. And you have sort of ties of friendship or ties of family. It makes it difficult to impose order and to sort of perhaps sack people who misbehave.
Ambassador, your reaction, cronyism, is that a fair?
Well, it is not a fair phenomenon, but we are trying to create a meritocracy in Azerbaijan. And again, one of the laws which we adopted and which covers primarily the area of the recruitment on the government service or state service, it provides for a very serious interviews and tests to be passed by the would-be civil servants, and then they are taken to staff.
Creation of a meritocracy, though, when I was there on the ground and speaking to opposition leaders and them telling me that they're being jailed, this young man that I spoke to was being jailed, that must be worrying for you. If you're trying to come across as trying to enhance the kind of transparency, the credibility of the government, eliminate that cronyism, how is that sending a good message? I mean, what's going on?
Well, every situation, whenever we're found wanting in terms of democracy or any problems, we do react, and we react very positively to the criticism, and we perceive it as the attitude towards Azerbaijan of people who do care. What you are saying is that, well, you can see increasingly, let's speak objectively, in the Azerbaijani society now, whenever there is a problem, for example, of the involvement of the police in the manifestations by the opposition forces or somebody else, and there is the excessive use of power, you can see that these policemen are being punished, and they are seriously punished, and there are investigations, criminal cases against them. Now, if you permit, well, I'd like to return to the question of the transparency and in the oil sector. Again, it is one of the manifestations, I mean lack of transparency, of the oil curse. But I'd like to remind you that the president of Azerbaijan, the current president, Mr. Ilham Aliyev, he was the first to support the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which was the initiative of the British Prime Minister, Tony Blair. And he was here in June 2003 to pledge the support of the Azerbaijani government. And now, Azerbaijan has already produced the first ever reports about what we receive from the foreign companies active in Azerbaijan, what the government is paid, and at the same time the companies active in the country, they too do provide the information on what they pay to the government, and it is aggregated.
That's on an economical side perhaps, but just one more, I want to take it back to the political. Dr. Taylor, I've met with opposition leaders in Azerbaijan. They call it an authoritarian regime and they're suppressing the opposition. Is that fair?
It's not as bad as it was. I mean, with the current elections coming up now, I think the government is trying to show that it's giving the opposition some room in which to operate. They have allowed demonstrations to go ahead in Baku by the opposition coalitions in June. There is a little bit of sort of low-level harassment. There's a tendency for the for the Baku authorities to say you can have a demonstration, but you must have it here where we say we want you to have it, which isn't necessarily where the opposition want to have it. And there's a certain amount of harassment of media as well, and most of the media is actually state-controlled, either directly or indirectly. And certainly one hopes that this time around there won't be the unrest that we saw after 2003 parliamentary elections, where there was the police was fighting the demonstrators after the election, which was the West regarded as unfair, and neither free nor fair. And after that election there was a lot of unrest, which I think gave a lot of people fear that perhaps the times of chaos were coming back that we saw in the early 90s.
Ambassador, Dr. Taylor, thank you very much. Coming up, mad, bad and dangerous to work in after the break, we'll be taking one of our regular snapshots of the world's hotspots. Countries where business is anything but straightforward, and fixing football. We'll be looking at the ugly side of the beautiful game. All of that on People in Power next. Stay with us.